Today it's episode 5 of Mobile Suit Gundam, Atmospheric Reentry. The highlight, right at the start, is the true nature of so-called atmospheric friction. These days, you don't hear it as much, but people used to say atmospheric friction during reentry. That phenomenon doesn't actually exist. We now call it aerodynamic heat. So what exactly is aerodynamic heating, and why does it make for great drama? Reentry comes down to this. How do you survive the heat and pressure created by using the atmosphere as a brake? If white base simply drops straight from space to Earth, both the heat and the pressure would spike beyond safe limits. White base spent about a week flying from Luna 2 to Earth. Converting the Moon-Earth distance, that's roughly 400,000 kilometers. If it covered that in about 6 days, the speed works out to around 600 meters per second. Call it roughly Mach 1 to 2. And as it approaches Earth, gravity pulls it in and it accelerates more and more. From everyday life, this feels unreal. People assume there's 0 g between the Moon and Earth. Technically, yes, you're weightless, but that doesn't mean you just float in gently, not so. As white base falls toward Earth, the planet's gravity drags it in and the ship keeps picking up speed. By the time it reaches the atmosphere, it should be near Mach 20. In other words, reentry is about entering the air at around Mach 20 on as shallow a path as possible, using the atmosphere to brake and bleeding off speed over several minutes until you're down around Mach 1. Now imagine all that at Mach 20 with white base's huge mass. Energy scales with mass times speed, right? So the ship's massive mass times the roughly 19 Mach drop turns into a vast amount of heat that comes right back at white base. During that window, radio and even laser communications become unusable. That kind of grounded science is one of the attractions of Mobile Suit Gundam Episode 5, Atmospheric Reentry. And then there's everyone's favorite, the Gundam hammer. Well, maybe not everyone's favorite. Do I have a Gundam hammer model? Not today. It's that classic spiked iron ball on a chain, a weapon called the Gundam hammer. I honestly find it delightfully ridiculous, and I love it. I'll be analyzing that weapon, so give it a listen. Alright, are you ready for Mobile Suit Gundam? Episode 5, Atmospheric Reentry? Then please enjoy. Toshio Okada's Gundam Lecture. Today we're tackling Episode 5, Atmospheric Reentry. Story-wise, after Episode 4, Escape from Luna 2, white base is ordered to head to Earth. As they attempt atmospheric reentry, the stakes and the scale jump up. Originally, both white base and the Gundam are space weapons, designed for 0 g or use inside space colonies. So how will they fight on Earth? And Char launches one last strike. From here on, the main opponent becomes Garma Zabi, the Zabi family's youngest son, who throws Zeon's powerful ground forces at white base. White base does manage to survive re-entry and reach Earth, but that twist is the broad outline of Episode 5. When white base left Luna 2, it was carrying refugees. In fact, practically everyone aboard is a refugee. A few Earth Federation Forces soldiers did survive on board, but most were injured. the only one fit to function as an officer was 18-year-old Bright Noah. The rest of the military personnel were wounded and taken in at Luna 2, so aside from Bright and his group, almost everyone is a refugee. Because the main characters wear uniforms and sortie in the Gundam, it's easy to see it as the white base crew versus the refugees, but in reality almost all of them are refugees. Among the refugees, the elderly begin to voice complaints. We thought Luna 2 would take us in, but they didn't. Maybe those uniformed youngsters are fine with that, but we are not. When did a leader get appointed? And when are we going back to Side 7? Of course, there's no going back. That's the kind of demand the elders are making. It's not too bad yet this time, but arguments are starting. From the next episodes on, conflict deepens between the so-called white base crew, really just refugee boys in uniforms, and the adult refugees. Amid this, an old man, thinking white base is headed to Jaburo in South America, and he can go home, says this. Old man, when we reach Earth, I'm taking that boy to my hometown. That boy is a little kid whose toy Amuro fixed for. Old man, I thought I'd never set foot on Earth again. Before I came to Side 7, I ran a coffee plantation in South America. You know what these are? Coffee beans. Old man, once I'm back on Earth, I'm not moving again. Even if Zeon attacks, even if some Earth Federation big shot orders an evacuation, I'll die. That's his line. It flows so naturally it can seem unrelated, but it actually tells you what war looks like in Gundam. Why show coffee beans and bring up his plantation in South America? For this old man, the enemy is certainly the Zeon forces that attacked Side 7. But he originally lived on that plantation in South America, and he never says it failed. From his line about, even if the big shots order an evacuation, you can tell he was forced out. Read together, it implies this. Jaburo, the Earth Federation's largest base, is in South America. To build it, people who had lived ordinary lives there, families who'd prospered on coffee plantations for generations, were all driven out and dumped in space at Side 7. So to him, the ones he resents include not only the invading Zeon, but equally the Earth Federation officials who expelled him from Earth. And the creators have him say this to Amuro, who hasn't realized any of it. Amuro doesn't need to understand it yet, but for viewers it explains the larger structure. Amuro is about to hate Zeon, but on a more macro level, this is what's going on. For the old man, both are enemies, Zeon, who attacked Side 7, and the Earth Federation, who drove him off his farm. That's why they intentionally give him the line about a coffee plantation in South America and have him show Amuro the beans. If Gundam had been produced as a longer serial, they might have seeded this as foreshadowing and paid it off later. But that's wishful thinking now. There are 3 key things to watch in atmospheric reentry. First, the rare battle scenario of an atmospheric reentry. Second, the Gundam hammer. It's the moment this usually IQ 120 show drops to about IQ 80 and forces Gundam to use a spiked iron ball on a chain. Third, Char's inner conflict, depicted here probably for the last time. After he reunites with Garma, he hardly shows that side again. It reveals what kind of person Char actually is. Those three threads make up atmospheric reentry. Let's start with the first, the battle during reentry. Here's what Char tells his men just before reentry. Char, it's fortunate that 3 more Zakus made it in time. We enter the atmosphere in 20 minutes. No one has ever dared initiate battle at this timing. Once Earth's gravity pulls us in and we hit the atmosphere, even a Zaku would burn up. Char, but precisely because the enemy's attention is fully on re-entry, this is our chance to strike with Zaku's. Primary target, the Trojan horse. Secondary target, the enemy mobile suit. The fight shouldn't last even 2 minutes, but you can carry out this plan. So it's a battle with barely 2 minutes on the clock. White base now descends toward Earth and begins re-entry, and the heat is tremendous. Fighting during re-entry is understated yet amazing. Earlier SF anime mostly hand-waved this, having ships drift back to Earth at leisure. Gundam, driven by Yoshiyuki Tomino's desire to do serious SF, takes the time to depict it properly. Let me stress up front, the common phrase, atmospheric friction, is wrong. When a large object plunges into the air, many assume heat comes from air rubbing along its surface. That's not what's happening. At Mach 20 or 30, the air can't get out of the way. It piles up and compresses in front of the object. That creates what you learned in school as adiabatic compression. When compressed without exchanging heat with the surroundings, a gas's temperature rises. At these extreme speeds, there's effectively no time for heat exchange. As a result of that compression, temperatures at the bow shock were said to reach on the order of 5,000 to 6,000 degrees Celsius for the Apollo spacecraft, and roughly 1,000 to 2,000 degrees Celsius even for the spaceship. So it isn't friction, it's heat from compressed air. Naturally, Zeon warships can't withstand that, so they descend in dedicated small drop capsules for atmospheric entry. The Earth Federation escorting ship Salamis also uses descent capsules. But White Base attempts to descend as a whole ship. That both shocks and scares Char's team. They think, at the war's outset, Zeon's technology was clearly years ahead of the Earth Federation. But in just 8 months, the Federation leveraged its vast resources to overtake us, building a spacecraft that can re-enter on its own, and a white mobile suit, the Gundam, that outperforms our Zaku's. That's what frightens Char and company. Which is why they conclude, we must crush it early, and the moment when re-entry pins them down is our chance. As you see in the episode, the fight drags on and one Zaku fails to break away, slips into the atmosphere, shields itself with its body, and explodes. At the same time, Gundam also fails to disengage and begins re-entry. Char thinks he's won. He lost the skirmish, but strategically he's destroyed the Gundam. But Gundam pulls a strange film-like sheet from its hip, throws it over itself, and survives re-entry. It's a famous scene. The later compilation films changed the setting here. Near the end of the episode, Gundam cloaks itself in that film and enters the atmosphere. This uses ablation, ablative heat shielding, a technique the space shuttle didn't use, so fewer people know it now. When the Apollo, Mercury, and Gemini spacecraft toured Japan for NASA exhibits back in the day, I went to see them. The undersides were smooth as can be. Why? Because the underside was coated with 40 to 50 centimeters of polymer, chemicals layered on thick. That polymer melts and vaporizes under heating by the air, carrying the heat away as it changes phase. That's the principle of ablation. In short, you lay on a thick, plastic-like coating that melts, vaporizes, and flakes off in the heat, so the core structure isn't heated. On screen, the Gundam's film looks thin, just a few centimeters, but if it's ablative, it would actually need to be on the order of 50 to 60 centimeters thick. That much polymer would melt and slough off in layers, shielding Gundam from the heat. It's not about a super heat-resistant material. The point is that it sacrificially melts away. By the end of Reentry, it can be so thin, the airflow rips it off. That's fine. That's the idea of ablation. Thanks to that, Gundam makes it through. And when I said Reentry was the first big highlight, I meant Char's plan here. Dren, I see it now, Lieutenant Commander Char. Even if we fail to shoot them down before Reentry, we can force them to change their descent angle and draw the Trojan horse over a continent we control, a two-stage plan. That's how Dren puts it. That's Char's plan in full. White Base's intended destination was South America, Federation territory with a base. But when Char attacks, he has missiles fired slightly above their ship. To dive under them, White Base drops lower and lower. In orbit, dropping lower doesn't mean steering down. It means reducing orbital velocity. You're doing around 7.8 kilometers per second. Lower that speed, and you can lower your altitude. But when you slow down, your trajectory changes automatically, and your entry angle steepens. On the planned angle, they could have made South America. By forcing a steeper entry to evade the missiles, he drives them toward North America, specifically around today's United States, into Zeon-controlled territory. Dren later realizes this two-step scheme and praises him. Brilliant as always. Char's thinking was, attack, and even if that fails, herd them into your sphere of control. Because it's delivered in a quick line, it's easy to miss. In middle and high school, Director Tomino dreamed of becoming a rocket scientist. He'd constantly sketch orbital diagrams and exhaust velocities in his notebooks. So this stuff is right up his alley. Laughs. What makes orbital docking hard is that you have to match not just speed, but orbital altitude. A layperson imagines you just line two craft up and have the one behind thrust a bit to catch up. Not so. In orbit, if you accelerate clumsily, you raise your orbital speed and actually climb. Motion there behaves in ways that feel counterintuitive to us. Few astronauts were true specialists in this. On Apollo 11, there was Aldrin, who famously butted heads with Commander Armstrong. Aldrin was the rendezvous and docking expert. He was told, "The lunar module is yours," and he eagerly accepted, only to be informed, "But Armstrong is commander, so he'll step onto the moon first." He felt betrayed. There was a huge row, as I've told before. Someday when we cover the Apollo spacecraft in this course, I'll share more of that story. The point is, deep space and orbit are different regimes, and motion in orbit is more complex than you think. Char bets the white base crew are amateurs who won't realize that lowering altitude changes their destination, and he lures them into North America. Char really is sharp. Smart guy. Even if he fails to finish them in orbit, he can hand white base off to Garma's forces afterward. If Garma shoots them down, great. If Garma fails, Char can still claim credit. "I drove the Trojan horse to your doorstep when your all-out attack couldn't stop it." It's a multi-layered scheme that shows Char's cunning and smarts, one of the reasons this is such a good episode. Next, the Gundam hammer. The Gundam hammer is a weapon, a huge spiked iron ball on a chain with a handle. Gundam swings it and smashes foes with it. Earlier robot anime had similar weapons, but those shows weren't going for realism, so it didn't feel odd. For example, in Zambot 3, 2 series before Gundam, characters wielded swords and spears, and it wasn't strange. But in Gundam, it starts to look questionable. Still, director Yoshiyuki Tomino prided himself on being a professional, famous for accommodating sponsors' requests to the letter. Before a show even started, at the planning stage he'd visit the sponsor and say, "Tell me everything you want. I'll put it all in." For Gundam, he went to Clover, toy company, and asked, "What do you want?" Clover said, "The hero robot should combine from 3 parts, red, blue, and yellow." He agreed. "Got it. 3-part combiner." He then reworked it. The center becomes an escape capsule that transforms into a fighter, while the upper and lower blocks are labeled the A part and B part in the show to make them feel like equipment, not like a Getter Robo-style 3-unit combo. So what else did Clover ask for? At the time, Bandai's Chogokin line had taken off die-cast zinc alloy robot figures. Strictly speaking, it involved antimony alloys, lead, tin, and other additives with antimony. The appeal: heavy, solid, easy to cast. You pour it and out pops a toy. Antimony alloys melt around 200 degrees Celsius. And adding hunks of metal to plastic toys gives them heft. Kids love that. A great idea. First came the small but weighty Chogokin Mazinger Z, mostly metal, though with lots of plastic parts too. Then combiners got bigger and bigger, and eventually you had box sets, like modern DVD boxes, with combining mecha and a spread of weapons bundled together. That kind of product became the toy store mainstay during Gundam's run. Chogokin was Bandai's trademark, but other companies sold lookalikes under names like ____ alloy. Gundam got that kind of box set too. Look at it and you can see what Clover demanded. First, a sword, then a gun, a naginata, a spiked iron ball, and a bazooka. Make sure the hero uses all of these. Playability mattered. A windowed box showing every weapon so a boy would think, "Whoa, cool! This robot uses all of these." Naturally, you'd expect a rocket punch, and Clover's Chogokin Gundam did fire a rocket punch. Laughed. Even Tomino didn't go that far in the anime. But the sword, gun, naginata, spiked iron ball, and bazooka all appear properly in Gundam's story. The sword became the beam saber. As to include a sword in a realistic robot show, Tomino thought, make a tube that emits a blade of light, a new weapon. We covered that in an early lecture. The gun became a long-range weapon, the beam rifle. What? An Earth Federation mobile suit with a battleship-class beam rifle. It debuted with that special weapon aura. As for the naginata, not a tiny spear tip but a big blade on a pole, exactly the kind of weapon kids love. That became the beam javelin. Pull out the beam saber, the shaft extends, and the tip flares open into a maple leaf-shaped blade of light, so Gundam looks like it's wielding a naginata. Later, during maintenance, Amuro flips a switch and the beam saber extends in the bay. The tip blossoms into light and becomes a naginata. They show it carefully. And when fighting Garma's Ga attack carrier, it even gets a hero moment, stabbing deep into a wing. But that spiked iron ball is awkward to use. Laughs. This time, Amuro sorties with the bazooka. The hyper bazooka is fun. Rounds are loaded from the rear, and every time Gundam fires, you see the next round cycle in with animation. So we can tell, only 2 rounds left, now 1. Because it's drawn so carefully, every time Amuro takes the hyper bazooka, viewers, like the boys back then, want to yell, "Amuro, don't! You've only got 4 shots. Can't you see 5 enemy mobile suits out there in space? Why bring a weapon that fires only 4 times against 5 foes?" Laughs. But he was told the fight would last 2 minutes, so it would be long range rather than close combat. The bazooka fires rocket-propelled rounds, so it can hit targets very far away, great for striking enemies you can barely see. A beam rifle reaches far too, but its beam is so narrow that the slightest wobble misses. Compared to that, a bazooka can be aimed roughly and, likely with some guidance, detonate near the target, so for long range you want the bazooka. So Amuro brings the hyper bazooka and burns through the rounds in no time. Amuro, where's Char? Ha, not on my watch. There, and that's it, he's out. Amuro, Sayla, can you send a beam rifle? Sayla, impossible. There's a bit more fighting. Then Sayla finally calls. Sayla, Amuro, the only thing we can launch now is the Gundam hammer. Amuro, and there you go. That one seemingly throwaway exchange neatly positions this spiked iron ball in the story's logic. Call it Tamino's playful rigor. When introducing an unrealistic weapon, he shows the reasoning. We can't catapult something as dangerous as a beam rifle. The Gundam hammer it is. Launching a beam rifle by catapult does happen later, but at that moment Sayla judged. So after emptying the hyper bazooka and getting dragged into close combat, they flip it. Use a weapon that can't run out of ammo, the Gundam hammer. Only the Gundam hammer can be launched. That'll do, and out it goes. Surprisingly, it helps wham into a Zaku's belly, piloted by one of Char's. That's the Gundam hammer. Truly a spiked iron ball. Hit a mobile suit with it and it goes up like a nuke. Laughs. Turns out it's pretty effective. Thanks for waiting. I grabbed this from the office. Here's the Gundam hammer. Even beside the Gundam, it's huge. You can see it's a spiked iron ball. Laughs. Strictly, this is the Hyper Hammer, the version with rocket nozzles. So not the standard Gundam hammer, but you get the idea. Slam this into an enemy, and the destructive power is great. But toss something like this in space and you'll launch yourself backward. So it's not exactly ideal there. Even Tamino, who said, "Name your demands, I'll include them," must have regretted this one. Laughs. We'll continue the Gundam hammer chat in the latter half. Also in the main talk I said antimony alloy, but strictly it's an alloy of lead, tin, and antimony. Its weakness is cold. Chogokin was developed and launched by Poppy, originally a Bandai subsidiary. Instead of making every piece plastic, casting some parts in die-cast alloy gives toys a satisfying heft. That was the idea. They engineered them in Tokyo and Shizuoka, figured they were fine, and shipped. But because the alloy hates cold, complaints came from Hokkaido. The metal crumbled right out of the box. It didn't mean you can't play in Hokkaido. Rather, stored for long periods in minus 20 degrees Celsius warehouses, die-cast alloy can get very brittle. Modern Super Chogokin likely fixed this by changing the mix, but back then, with Mazinger Z-era toys, such tragedies in Hokkaido became otaku lore. And there's Dren's line, brilliant as always, Lieutenant Commander Char, about that changing orbit. After the second half, I'll use this beach ball globe to explain a bit more. That's the end of the free portion of the Gundam lecture, Atmospheric Reentry. From here, it's paid. Ready for the paid second half? Please start it. Go ahead.